The relentless prairie sun beat down on Lily's slumped form, a merciless eye in a vast, indifferent sky. 16 years old, and already the world had shown her its harshest face, culminating in this final, brutal act of abandonment. Her father, a man whose hands knew only how to take or to strike, had tethered her to a weathered fence post with a frayed length of rope, like an unwanted animal, and driven off without a backward glance. Dust caked her torn dress, her throat was a desert, and the raw welts on her wrists from the rope were a fresh torment atop older, faded scars that mapped a history of cruelty. Each shallow breath was a testament to her desperation, a tiny, flickering ember of defiance against the crushing weight of hopelessness. She was alone, utterly and terrifyingly alone, with only the buzzards circling high above for company. Her small, precious bundle of belongings, a threadbare blanket, a wooden bird her mother had carved, and a dog-eared book of fairy tales, lay just out of reach, a cruel reminder of every fragile dream now seemingly lost to the prairie wind. Miles away, yet in a solitude just as profound, Elias Thorne moved through the quiet rooms of his ranch house. The silence here was a living thing, thick with the ghosts of laughter and a love long past. His wife, Martha, had been gone 5 years, taken by a fever that swept through the valley, and with her she'd taken the light from his life. The ranch, once a shared dream, was now a daily reminder of his solitary existence, a sprawling testament to labor without joy. He was a man carved from the rugged land itself, weathered and stoic, his heart encased in a protective layer of grief. His hands, though calloused and strong, moved with a weariness that had little to do with physical labor and everything to do with a spirit starved of connection. He lacked purpose beyond the relentless cycle of seasons and chores. Fulfillment was a forgotten language. His own scars, though invisible, ran deep, a constant throb of sorrow and regret for words unsaid, for a future stolen. The wind, which had been Lily's tormentor, became her unlikely herald. It carried the faint, distressed bleating of a lamb that had strayed too close to a coyote den, drawing Elias from his chores. He'd ridden out further than usual, tracking the sound, when a flicker of something out of place near the boundary fence caught his eye. It was not the dun color of the prairie grass, nor the gray of the weathered wood. As he drew closer, his weathered face, usually set in lines of grim endurance, tightened with disbelief, then a stark, cold anger. He saw the rope first, then the small, slumped figure. For a moment, the world tilted, the familiar landscape warping into something nightmarish. He'd seen hardship, he'd seen cruelty, but this was an abomination. Elias dismounted, his movements slow, deliberate, as if approaching a startled fawn. Lily flinched as his shadow fell over her. Her eyes, when she managed to lift her heavy lids, were wide with a terror that clawed at something buried deep within him. He said nothing at first, simply knelt and, with his clasp knife, carefully sawed through the coarse rope binding her wrists. The fibers parted, and she slumped further, a marionette with cut strings. "Easy now, child," he murmured, his voice rusty from disuse, yet gentle. He offered his canteen, and she drank, hesitantly at first, then with a desperate thirst that spoke of long hours under the sun. Her hands, he noted, were raw and bleeding, trembling as she held the metal container. He saw the fading bruises on her arms, the haunted look in her eyes, a look that mirrored the desolation in his own soul, albeit from a different, more violent storm. He helped her to her feet, her legs barely able to support her. She was light, too light, like a bird with broken wings. There was an unspoken understanding that passed between them in that moment, a recognition of profound suffering, though its shape and cause were vastly different. Her resilience, even in this broken state, the flicker of spirit in those terrified eyes, struck a chord in him. He lifted her onto his horse, her meager bundle retrieved and secured, and turned towards home, a fragile, unexpected responsibility settled upon his broad shoulders. The journey back to the ranch was made in a silence punctuated only by the rhythmic clip-clop of the horse's hooves and Lily's occasional rasping cough. Elias's house, a sturdy but unadorned structure, seemed to loom large and intimidating as they approached. For Lily, every new sight was a potential threat, every sound a harbinger of more pain. Elias led her into the kitchen, the heart of the home, though its hearth had been cold for too long. He gestured towards a chair. "Sit, rest." His words were few, but his actions spoke volumes. He moved with a quiet efficiency, stoking the fire in the old wood stove, fetching a basin of warm water and clean cloths. He gently cleaned her wrists, applying a soothing salve Martha had always made from herbs in her garden. Lily watched him, her gaze unwavering, a trapped animal assessing its captor. But there was no menace in his touch, only a rough sort of care. He offered her a bowl of thin broth, and she ate slowly, her eyes never leaving his face. The fear was still there, a living thing in the small space between them, but it was being slowly, painstakingly, crowded out by a nascent, fragile curiosity. He saw the intelligence in her gaze, the quiet dignity that even her horrific ordeal could not entirely extinguish. Days bled into weeks, establishing a tentative rhythm in the quiet house. Elias gave Lily the small room that had once been Martha's sewing room, its window looking out onto the vast, open prairie. He made no demands on her, asked few questions. He simply existed alongside her, a steady, unobtrusive presence. He would rise before dawn, tend to the ranch, and leave food for her on the kitchen table. Lily, in turn, remained mostly in her room, a ghost haunting the edges of his solitary life. Slowly, cautiously, she began to emerge. She started by tidying the kitchen, her movements small, almost apologetic. Then she began to mend some of Elias's worn shirts, her stitches neat and precise, a skill learned in a harsher environment. These small acts were her language, a way of offering something in return for the shelter and food, a quiet plea for acceptance. He would find a button sewn on, a tear mended, and a peculiar warmth would spread through his chest, unfamiliar and almost unwelcome for its intensity. Trust was not a word spoken between them. It was a delicate tapestry woven thread by painstaking thread, with gestures of unspoken support and the shared solace of routine. He provided safety, a shield against the harshness she had known. She, in her quiet way, began to breathe a semblance of life back into the dormant corners of his home, chasing away some of the deeper shadows. Yet, the past was a persistent ghost for them both. Lily's nights were often filled with terrors, muffled cries, escaping her lips as nightmares replayed the horrors she had endured. Elias would hear her sometimes, his own heart aching with a helpless compassion. He'd find her in the morning, pale and drawn, the shadows under her eyes deeper than usual. He never pressed, never asked about the source of her night terrors, understanding that some wounds were too raw to expose to the light. He simply ensured the coffee was hot, or that a fresh-baked biscuit, something Martha used to make, was waiting for her. His own grief, the ever-present ache of Martha's absence, found a strange resonance with Lily's unspoken pain. He saw his own sorrow reflected in her haunted eyes, and it made him more patient, more attuned to the nuances of her healing. The fear of her past finding her, of her father returning, was a constant, unspoken dread that hung in the air. For Elias, there was also the subtle fear of what the townsfolk might say if they knew, the judgment that could fall upon them both. He had kept her presence a secret, a fragile sanctuary he was determined to protect. This is Thomas, by the way, the voice guiding you through Lily and Elias's journey. It's stories like these, of resilience and unexpected connection, that truly move us. Before we see what new challenges await them, I'd love for you to introduce yourself in the comments and let me know where you're tuning in from. We've seen Lily find a precarious safety with Elias, a silent understanding blooming in the isolation of the ranch. But the tendrils of her past are long and grasping, and the world outside the protective bubble of Elias's land is not always kind. The fragile peace they had cultivated was shattered one crisp autumn morning. Elias had ridden into the small, dusty town of Redemption for supplies, a trip he made only when absolutely necessary. As he was loading sacks of flour and sugar into his wagon, he saw him, a burly, unkempt man lounging outside the saloon, his eyes scanning the street with a predatory gleam. It was Jedediah Miller, Lily's father. Elias felt a cold dread seep into his bones. Miller hadn't seen him, but his presence in Redemption was like a thunderclap, announcing an impending storm. The man was a direct threat, the embodiment of Lily's deepest terrors. Elias finished his business with a grim urgency, his mind racing. How had Miller found his way here? Was he actively searching for Lily, or was it a cruel coincidence? The questions churned within him, each one a fresh wave of anxiety for the girl who had, against all his initial reservations, carved out a space in his guarded heart. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the core, that Miller's reappearance was not a random occurrence. It was a catalyst, a spark that threatened to ignite the powder keg of Lily's trauma and destroy the sanctuary he had tried to build. The ride back to the ranch was fraught with a tension that mirrored the turmoil in Elias's soul. He had to tell Lily, had to prepare her, but the thought of the fear it would reignite in her eyes was a burden he carried heavily. When he arrived, Lily was in the small garden patch she had started, coaxing late-season vegetables from the stubborn soil. There was a smudge of dirt on her cheek, and for a fleeting moment, a hint of a smile touched her lips as she looked up at him. The sight of that fragile happiness, so hard-won, made his task even more difficult. He told her, his voice low and steady, choosing his words carefully. The effect was immediate and devastating. The color drained from her face, her eyes widening with a familiar, stark terror. She swayed, and he reached out, his hand steadying her arm. "He won't touch you, Lily," Elias vowed, his voice a low growl. "Not while I draw breath." This was the ultimate test of his unspoken commitment to her. His protective instincts, dormant for so long, surged with a fierce intensity. For Lily, it was a terrifying echo of her past. But within that fear, a new resolve began to stir. She had known kindness now. She had known safety, however fleeting. She straightened her shoulders, a spark of defiance replacing the sheer panic in her eyes. I won't go back with him," she whispered, her voice trembling but firm. Her courage, fragile as it was, fortified his own. He saw not just a victim, but a survivor, a young woman finding her strength in the face of unimaginable adversity. His values, his very sense of self, were now inextricably linked to protecting this girl. The confrontation, when it came, was inevitable. A few days later, Miller appeared at the ranch, bold and swaggering, a cruel smirk on his face. He'd clearly been asking questions in town, piecing together where his property might have ended up. Lily was inside, but she saw him from the window, her breath catching in her throat. Elias met him on the porch, his stance implacable, his shotgun held loosely but purposefully at his side. "Miller," Elias stated, his voice flat and devoid of welcome. "You're not welcome here," Miller laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "She's my daughter, my property. I've come to collect what's mine." His eyes darted towards the house, and Lily flinched as if struck. "She's a child you abandoned, left for dead," Elias retorted, his voice rising, a cold fury simmering beneath the surface. "She's under my protection now. She's not going anywhere with you." The exchange was tense, the air thick with unspoken violence. It was then that Lily did something unexpected. She opened the door and stepped out onto the porch, positioning herself slightly behind Elias, but visible. Her hands were clenched, her body trembling, but her gaze was fixed on her father. "I'm not going with you," she said, her voice clearer and stronger than Elias had ever heard it. "You don't own me." Miller's smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of surprise, then rage. He took a step forward, but Elias shifted, the shotgun becoming a more prominent statement. "You heard the girl," Elias said. "Leave, and don't come back." Miller, faced with Elias's unyielding resolve and Lily's newfound defiance, and perhaps the clear implication of the shotgun, hesitated. He spat on the ground, his eyes filled with venom. "This ain't over, old man," he snarled, before turning and stalking away, his retreat as ugly as his arrival. In the aftermath of Miller's retreat, a profound silence descended, heavier and more significant than any before. Elias slowly lowered the shotgun, his shoulders slumping slightly with the release of tension. Lily remained standing, trembling, but her head was held high. He turned to her, his expression unreadable for a moment, then a deep, aching tenderness softened his features. "You were brave, Lily," he said, his voice husky. "Braver than you know." She looked at him, tears welling in her eyes, not of fear this time, but of a complex mix of relief, exhaustion, and something akin to gratitude. That evening, as the shadows lengthened and the prairie chill set in, they sat by the fire, the shared ordeal having stripped away the last vestiges of their reserve. Lily began to speak, haltingly at first, then with a growing fluency, of the years of abuse, the constant fear, the casual cruelty that had defined her existence. She spoke of her mother, who had tried to protect her but had been too broken herself, and of the small, secret dreams she had nurtured in the darkest of times. Elias listened, his heart aching with a compassion so profound it felt like a physical weight. He, in turn, found himself speaking of Martha, of their shared dreams for the ranch, of the crushing loneliness that had consumed him since her death. He spoke of his own regrets, the silences he wished he had filled with words of love. In sharing their deepest wounds, their most vulnerable truths, the bond between them solidified, transforming from one of protector and protected into something far deeper, a connection of two souls who had found solace and understanding in each other's presence. It was a quiet catharsis, a shedding of old skins, leaving them exposed but also, strangely, stronger. Their bond has been forged in shared adversity, but the fight for their peace is far from over. Make sure you're subscribed and have notifications turned on, because you won't want to miss how they build their future from the ashes of their past. The confrontation with Miller was a turning point, a line drawn in the sand. Lily had found her voice, and Elias had rediscovered a fierce purpose. Now, they had to decide what future they would build, not just in defiance of the past, but in active creation of something new, something hopeful. The immediate threat of Miller had receded, but his shadow lingered. Elias knew the man was unlikely to give up easily, especially if he perceived Lily as a lost asset. The first tangible step towards a shared, more secure future involved a trip to Redemption, this time not just for supplies, but to see Judge Harriman. Elias, with Lily by his side, a quiet but resolute presence, explained the situation, his words simple and direct. He spoke of finding Lily, of Miller's abandonment and subsequent threats. He omitted none of the ugliness. Lily, when asked, corroborated his account, her voice soft but steady, her gaze meeting the judge's without flinching. Her visible scars, the ones on her wrists still pink and healing, spoke more eloquently than any words. Judge Harriman, a man known for his stern demeanor but underlying fairness, listened intently. He'd seen his share of hardship and knew the brutal realities of life on the frontier. He issued a restraining order against Jedediah Miller, making it clear that if the man set foot on Elias's property or accosted Lily again, he would face the full force of the law. More than that, he began the quiet, informal process of granting Elias legal guardianship of Lily, recognizing that the ranch, under Elias's care, was the safest place for her. It was a small town, and while tongues might wag, the judge's quiet endorsement carried weight. With a measure of legal security established, a new energy infused the ranch. It was subtle at first, then more noticeable. Elias began to repair the broken fences with a renewed vigor, not just as a chore, but as an act of fortification, of creating a defined, safe space. Lily, her confidence growing daily, took over the chicken coop, her gentle care resulting in a surprising abundance of eggs. She expanded her small garden, and the vibrant colors of vegetables and herbs began to push back against the muted tones of the prairie. They worked together, often in comfortable silence, mending the old barn roof, clearing a new pasture. These shared tasks were more than just labor. They were bricks in the foundation of their new life, tangible proof of their commitment to a future they were building side by side. The house itself seemed to breathe easier. Lily brought in wildflowers, their simple beauty brightening the somber rooms. The aroma of baking bread, a skill she learned from one of Martha's old cookbooks, often filled the air, a scent of home that Elias hadn't realized how much he'd missed. Miller, true to his nature, was seen lurking on the outskirts of redemption once or twice, but the judge's warning, coupled with the clear message from the community that his presence was unwelcome, seemed to have an effect. Eventually, word came that he drifted further west, a malevolent shadow finally receding from their lives. The townsfolk of Redemption, initially prone to gossip and suspicion about the old widower and the young girl on his ranch, began to see a different picture. They saw Elias in town, no longer quite so gaunt and haunted, a protective arm sometimes resting on Lily's shoulder as he guided her through the general store. They saw Lily, no longer a terrified waif, but a young woman blossoming with a quiet strength, her eyes clear and her smile, though still shy, genuine. Mrs. Peterson, the storekeeper's wife, who had initially pursed her lips in disapproval, found herself offering Lily a piece of peppermint candy one day, a small, unspoken apology. The minister, who had privately questioned Elias, saw them attending the occasional Sunday service, sitting quietly in the back pew, a picture of unconventional but undeniable familial peace. There was no grand announcement, no sudden shift, but a gradual, grudging acceptance that bloomed into a quiet respect. Elias and Lily didn't seek external validation. They had found their peace within the boundaries of the ranch, in their shared work and growing affection. But the subtle shift in the community's perception was a balm, an acknowledgement that their small, found family was not an aberration to be judged, but a testament to resilience and compassion. Some scars, they knew, would always remain, but they were no longer gaping wounds. They were part of their story, a reminder of the storms weathered and the quiet harbor found. Years passed, flowing like the seasons across the prairie. The ranch thrived, not just in livestock and crops, but in the quiet contentment that permeated its very soil. Lily, now a young woman of 21, moved with a grace and confidence that belied the horrors of her youth. Elias had ensured she received an education, hiring a traveling tutor in the early years, and later she had devoured every book she could find, her mind as fertile as the garden she so lovingly tended. She managed the ranch's accounts with a sharp intellect and worked alongside Elias, her strength and resilience a constant source of quiet pride for him. The lines of grief on Elias's face had softened, replaced by a gentle wisdom and the easy smile that came whenever he looked at Lily. He was no longer the isolated, grief-stricken man who had stumbled upon a broken child. He was a father, a mentor, a man whose purpose had been reignited by an unexpected gift of love. Their home was a haven, filled with the comfortable rhythms of a life built on mutual respect and deep affection. The scars they both carried, his of loss and hers of abuse, were still there, but they were no longer sources of pain. Instead, they were like the rings of an old tree, telling the story of their growth, their survival, their healing. They told a story of how two broken souls, abandoned and grieving, had found a way to piece together not just their own lives, but each other's, creating something whole and beautiful. Their found family, though small, was strong. Sometimes, young Ben, the son of a neighboring rancher whom Elias had helped through a tough winter, would come by, ostensibly to learn about cattle from Elias, but more often than not, to share a piece of Lily's apple pie and listen to her talk about the books she was reading. The community, once a source of potential judgment, now looked to Elias and Lily with a mixture of respect and affection. The Thorn Ranch was known as a place of quiet industry and unexpected kindness. They had not set out to build a legacy, but in their shared resilience, in the compassion they extended to others, they had created one nonetheless. It was a legacy written not in grand pronouncements, but in the everyday acts of care, in the steadfast loyalty that bound them, and in the quiet hope that radiated from their small corner of the world. It was a testament to the enduring power of human connection to heal even the deepest wounds. On quiet evenings, they would often sit on the porch, much like Elias had once done alone, but the silence now was different. It was not empty, but full of unspoken understanding, shared memories, and a profound, peaceful contentment. Lily would sometimes read aloud, her voice clear and steady, and Elias would listen, watching the stars begin to prick the vast canvas of the prairie sky. He would look at the young woman beside him, a woman of strength, intelligence, and boundless compassion, and marvel at the journey they had undertaken. From the ashes of profound sorrow and unimaginable cruelty, they had built a life. They had faced the darkness and found their way to a new dawn. Their intertwined paths, a testament to the enduring truth that even in the harshest landscapes, hope could take root and love, in its myriad forms, could indeed conquer all. Their scars did not define them. Rather, they told the story of their healing, a quiet, powerful narrative of redemption found in the most unexpected of places. If you're a returning viewer, we'd love to hear from you. Just type "yes" in the comments to let us know you're part of our growing community. Your support truly means the world to us and allows us to keep bringing you stories like Lily and Elias's. Thank you for watching.